Thank you very much, and welcome back, everybody. And I know I have the attention in the main tent here. If everybody in the networking tent could turn to a monitor and listen to me for just one moment. Because Stephanie Mehta's mic was off this morning, I just wanted to make sure that everybody heard we're going to have a very exciting event at 10 p.m. tonight in downtown Aspen at a bar called Thin Bars, where I will be interviewing the New Yorker writer George Packer, who's going to have some interesting things to say about Silicon Valley. That's at 10 p.m. tonight. It's at capacity, and it'll be first come, first served, so come a little early and get yourself a seat. For our next panel, I'm excited to learn about what our next panel has to say about big data. Is it the CMO's greatest weapon? Who's turning data into insight, into strategy? Our moderator is Michael Schrage, research fellow at the MIT Center for Digital Business. Please welcome Michael and his panelists who are on the auxiliary stage.
Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Welcome back from the break. We're talking, ostensibly the title is Who Owns Big Data? We're going to discuss what that means, but who owns and gets value from big data is what we're really going to talk about. And the narrative spine of this is going to be the theme of transformation. And that is, a decade ago, you literally had orders of magnitude less data to do things with. Shantanu, Adobe is a company that Creative Suite, you've transformed the company, and you have an ongoing transformation of the company of trying to link those creative tools with marketing and analytic tools. You're transforming through the cloud the capabilities of your clients and your customers, and in the process, you're becoming a big data company. And John, ESPN, what's the phrase, best available screen, there are fantasy leagues, there's Moneyball, there's analytics. You've been running this for a decade. The opportunities with data have transformed what you're capable of doing. But I want to ask you, I want to start with you, Shantanu. Big data can be a resource, it can be an enabler, it can be a driver. Which of those things has big data been for Adobe and for your most important customers?
I think it's easy, Michael. It's a driver. I mean, I think there's no question about it. Just a little bit about Adobe. I mean, we've always been about storytelling, and I heard Jeff and others talk about storytelling, and we just believe that the next generation of storytelling is not just about the content, but it's about content plus data. And so both in terms of how we transform what we do for our customers, and in terms of how the customers need to transform what they do to provide the next generation experiences, it's not just going to be about the art, but it's going to be about the art and the science.
What do you think on those lines?
I totally agree. And the news yesterday that Nate Silver is joining ESPN, again, the marriage of analytics to storytelling central to what we do and what we see going forward.
Well, funny that you mentioned Nate Silver, and I want to use this to highlight a larger point. Nate Silver, as you know, did the popular 538 blog. He's coming to ESPN. And the public editor of the New York Times posted a piece basically saying, Nate never fit into the repertorial and storytelling culture of the New York Times. You look at Moneyball, the whole Michael Lewis story is that the traditional scouting in baseball was inimical with analytics. I know a lot of journalists. I was a journalist. Some of my best friends are journalists. They love doing storytelling. They can't add and subtract to save their lives. And the idea of doing statistics and meaningful analytics, it's a joke. The reason they became journalists is that they couldn't do math. So the question I want to ask you is, when we talk about marketing, are your customers sophisticated enough to draw upon big data for analytics? Or is the fact that, one of your phrases is, embrace rocket science. Most of the CMOs I know would blow up if they embraced rocket science. They can't do the math.
Well, I think it's up to companies like Adobe to make that data actionable.
Okay.
So I think it's not really about, everybody going through reams of data. It's about how can you make that data actionable. I mean, I think John talks about on ESPN.com, if you look at data and really understand what customers are doing, are they following the football draft, or are they following what's on the cover story? If you can't take all of that data and provide the right insights, then you're just going to be behind the competition. So I think it's about companies making this data actionable And so that the storytelling aspect's always going to be really, really critical. But if it's devoid of any data that's going, it's not going to work.
Yeah. So I wanted to give the example. This is April of 2012, and the NBA playoffs are starting, and the Knicks are playing Miami in Miami. And we have a beautiful homepage with a picture of LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony, and the game's on ABC. And I'm looking at it, it's fantastic. And I go on to, just for fun, I go on to Adobe Analytics. And it's all terrific, except that 3 times as many people are looking for coverage of the 3rd round of the NFL draft. This is not the 1st round. This is the punters and the free agents. 3 times as many people. So I look at that, I take a breath, and I place a call to the homepage editors, and I say, please, can we elevate the headline box? You know, put a box up for the 3rd round of the NFL draft so that it's clear, people coming, they know what to get to. In our case, like the judgment the editors had made to lead with a basketball game, we thought was the right one. It was the best story, we were covering the game. But in real time, the analytics that we got from Adobe allowed us, I think, to make a fix, again, invisible to the fan, but that better served people. And we do that all day long.
Is that a function of big data? Is there a false dichotomy emerging between the quantities of data you have access to and the algorithms and the editorial sensibilities for extracting signal from all that data? How do you, I mean, if I'm dealing with someone like yourself, are you more interested in access to more databases on average, or are you more interested in getting access to algorithms that allow you to package a ticker?
I mean, again, we have some rocket scientists who work for us. We have 4 staffers who.
How many rocket scientists do you have?
We have we have probably between 600 and 700 people. We have probably on the order of at least 50 who are really focused.
And how long have they been around, by the way?
You know, they have added, but this is really the last 5 years or so you've really seen an uptick. I was just going to say that that what's really valuable is the packaging of this information. So as Shantanu says, you can do something with it. When we look at our writers, there are 7 different criteria that we're looking at them on Twitter. There are another 6 that we're looking at them on Facebook. If we just had the raw data, we would be powerless. It's the fact that the feeds are organized in a way that we can take a look and say, okay, something interesting is going on and we can do something with that.
You came from a traditional editorial background. What's the most important way you've changed the way you look at news, resources, numbers, stats in the wake of Moneyball, in the wake of tools that allow you to package the data more effectively?
I would just say we've come into focus that there are 3 things that really matter, okay? One is the live events and the importance of live events.
Right, which means you have a real-time bias.
Which means you have a real-time bias and you lead with the live event as long as there is a live event. And the wonderful thing about sports is the live event could be the Open Championship starting at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Second is an emphasis around personalization, because what you're looking for is different from what Shantanu is looking for, is what I'm looking for. And how do we reward people on their best available screen? An example, if you study our video, people are literally looking for different clips on different devices. My conventional wisdom coming into my job was, great, we'll just make this available on every screen, it'd be great. But the fact is that on a mobile device, we have many more people looking for one plays. On the PC, many more people are looking for narrative. It's not at all identical. And the third focus is just with the explosion of social media, just how important it is to take a look at content and contributors who fans are sharing. I saw a stat this morning that last year, Nate Silver generated 66,000 tweets that were linked to 538.com. That's probably triple our next leading contributor on ESPN.
So you think he's a better acquisition than Keith Olbermann?
I think they're both great. They're different. The one thing I'll say we were talking about before is the amount of attention that Nate Silver has drawn, commands, compared to the fact of Keith Olbermann coming back to ESPN, which is a big event in itself, has been startling to me.
Michael, I think it's actually different from just media and publishing. When you asked what's different, Monday morning meetings at Adobe used to be all about what's your revenue. You had the traditional distribution channels and you were getting all the financial information. I think everybody has to start thinking about how whatever data they have is going to be predictive about what's going to happen next week. You know, being able to automate all of your...
Not just next week.
Next week, next month, next year. So I think the way every business in America has to change is you're not looking at the data right now to tell you what happened yesterday, but you're looking at it for insights into what's happening. Jeff said something very interesting this morning. He said, I've got all the data on the royal baby as it relates to digital. I've got all the data as it relates to tablets, and I'm waiting for the information from TV.
Right.
That's just not going to be acceptable anymore.
I want to, but in terms of introspection and what you yourself have learned, your company, Adobe, has transitioned from creative packs and shrink-wrapped to the cloud. You now have, in theory, the internal capabilities to do predictive modeling, simulation, allocation, real-time monitoring of who's doing a good job of integrating content creation and the analytics that go along with it.
Right.
How has that changed what you do predictive modeling on? What's been the way you've moved the needle in the last 6 months as you've literally moved Adobe from physical to cloud?
Well, I think the vocabulary has changed. What Michael is alluding to is the fact that we announced earlier this year that we're not going to be shipping shrink-wrap software anymore. So the good news associated with that is when you have a subscription-based model, as all of you know, it's a more predictable model, hopefully. If you're not aware of the fact that every single day when somebody wakes up, you have to make sure that they remain a committed customer, you know, retention, active usage. So I think, you know, all this predictive modeling really leads us to think about if people are not using our software, if they're not using our services, they're less likely to subscribe. They're less likely to be retained.
What has predictive modeling enabled for you? You now have more real-time, like ESPN, you're becoming a real-time, quasi-live business if you want to be. What kind of predictive modeling are you discussing in those Monday morning meetings that you literally couldn't a year ago?
Well, it's similar to what John was talking about between the NBA and the NFL draft. We used to have all these discussions about which features people were using.
Right.
And did they value feature A or feature B? Nowadays, it's not a debate. You understand exactly what people are doing. And so I think what the modeling and what the data allows you to do is to actually have facts, and you can't argue with the data.
Yeah, our lead streaming partner is Akamai. And part of their added services is they will give us data to look at on 5-minute breaks. On television, you get Nielsen ratings in 15-minute breaks.
Right.
So what that enables us to do is when we create original programs like Fantasy Football Now or MMA Live, we can literally look at the 5-minute break and make decisions about how we put segments in based upon, you know, more people tuning in, more people tuning out. Should the Q&A go here? Should the advice on defensive backs go there? We're literally making those decisions, and that's because the data is available in a way that wasn't before that we can use it.
What do you say to the Rune Arledge wannabe who says, yeah, that's what the data says, but my gut says this?
We say
I'm here for a reason. Yeah, the data's there, but it's my gut. You've hired me for my judgment, not to be a slave to the data.
No, well, no one's expected to be a slave to the data. What we say is if you combine the best content with the best people and the best information, and we're conscientious in service of fans, we will get to a better place. So, we have brilliant editors who select our headlines, okay?
Right.
That's still.
And now you measure the effectiveness of those headlines.
But we can measure the effectiveness of the headlines.
And do people get hired? Have you made people more accountable because you can literally monitor them on whatever time-denominated basis you want?
Yes, we hold people accountable. But by the way, the industry does. There's there's a scorecard that comes out constantly. We can see what our traffic is. We can see what our SEO returns are. All those things. My point isn't that you're going one way or the other. It's the combination that is fantastic.
How well do you've now transformed originally with your Omniture acquisition? You made the hard dollar commitment to move Adobe from just a creative tools company to an analytics capability, managing huge, humongous amounts of data capability. How good of a job do your clients do of that kind of integration? Or is it a underutilized capability? And because you're on the cloud, you can tell What have you learned about how people have used these capabilities?
Well, first, we have a lot of data. We process something like 10 trillion transactions a year right now.
It's a good amount.
And so
it's not a petabyte, but it's okay.
We have over 20 petabytes of video data that's being done. So I can give you statistics in billions, trillions, whatever number you'd like. I think it's the spectrum, Michael. I think it's the spectrum of customers. Customers who are saying, let me make sure I measure everything. And that's sort of step one. You have to extend beyond measurement to be able to say, what am I going to be doing based on that? What's my assertion? What's my hypothesis? And how am I going to change my strategy based on what the data is?
Before I begin turning to the audience, I just want to follow up on that. You gave a talk at your marketing event, and there was said that there were 3 things you wanted organizations to take more seriously. The first was engage everywhere. The second was embrace rocket science, and the third was connect the dots. Part of your answer was companies that want to measure stuff. Do you think companies understand measurement better than they understand engagement? I'm not worried about an ESPN understanding engagement because it's sports, people self-select. But I can imagine a lot of B2B companies and traditional B2C companies saying, what are our most important metrics? How do we measure them better, as opposed to how do we engage better? What have you learned in that regard?
Well, I think there are a couple of truisms that really exist right now. The first is the whole art of marketing was all about engagement, but it was about engagement just through storytelling.
Right.
And I think now the art of marketing is going to be about that same kind of engagement, which couples the storytelling with the data, as we talked about earlier. And I think marketers are beginning to do that. I also actually fundamentally believe that marketing departments all across the world are going to have to be reorganized, to be thinking about your search engine is probably in one place, your socials in another place, your content and your websites in one place, and your commerce is in another place. And so engagement to people right now means engagement across all of these different devices. And so I think people are at the spectrum of, let me measure everything, let me understand what the implications are on my physical stores, let me understand. But I think we're so early in the engagement across multiple devices.
What percent of your customers, this is the mean question, what percent of your customers are world-class?
I love all my customers. I should start off with saying that. But I would say, I'll answer it this way, Michael. We are amazed at how much customers are pushing us into doing things that we did not even know was on their radar. And so what that tells me is they're actually ahead of us in many ways with respect to understanding where their customers need to be. When I have breakfast with John, he's telling me, I know all the things that you do well, but you're not doing A, B, and C. When you talk to financial services companies, they're thinking about it in a very different way because the timetable that they have to make those decisions are in the nanosecond. So I'm actually being pushed by all of these customers to do things that we don't believe.
Remarkably diplomatic answer. Do you have a reaction to that?
I was going to say that I got together with Shantanu a year ago, and I said we really need help in terms of video measurement, the ability to understand what goes on different devices. And so we're already a big customer of Adobe, and just over the last year, we've seen a much better understanding of how much video is consumed, ESPN video is consumed on Xbox.
Right.
Fascinating to us. Wow. And we just launched with the Apple TV, and the usage on that was, again, huge considering the install base. And so for us, the measurement is crucial and its power.
That's great. I'm struck by one other aspect. Now that you're being pushed by your customers in this way, the fact that you've gone cloud means how has your tempo of innovation and adoption changed? What's the difference between the time you hear something from a John Kosner and you begin to test it in your environment?
I think it's a great question, and frankly, we were on 12-month or 18-month cycles, when you had traditional desktop software, and that's just, unacceptable. You can't compete in this day and age. Whereas here, when you have a SaaS-based business, you can try something out for different customers.
How long does it take you typically?
It takes too long from, I think, the customer's point of view, but we release things virtually every week. Okay. So virtually every week, there's something coming out that's different. And we try it out with a couple of customers, and then when it's ready for prime time, every single customer has that turned on.
Excellent. I'd like to go to the audience here. We have a gentleman right up here. If the runner, sorry, this is more of a sprint now. Here we go.
Yeah, Hank Adams with Sport Mission. I have a question for John. John, you talked about using data for narrative storytelling, for ranking content and finding out what people are doing. What about using data for new content forms? Fantasy, gaming, datacast, that sort of stuff. How important is that?
It's really important. We also use it for program acquisition. A sport near and dear to Shantanu and my heart is cricket. And one thing we found out—
You are kidding me.
No, one thing we found out of the analytics was just how big the U.S. cricket audience is. That has informed program.
How big is the U.S. cricket audience?
It is.
And do you know the difference between a googly and a bosun?
I do not.
Cricket is baseball done right. I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, you know, the fact that it takes 6 days and you could have a tie after that, I mean, it's the love of the game, Michael.
My only point was
it's
that—
also corrupt in Pakistan.
Yeah, my only point was that it was the kind of not obvious thing that—
But how big is the audience for cricket?
The audience is huge in the millions here. For Crick Info, the U.S. is the second or third biggest country—
You're kidding.
After the subcontinent. So
After India?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you have a cricket fantasy league?
We do not have a cricket fantasy league, but it is.
Are
on
you
the list.
prepared to announce it here?
Well, I'm prepared to announce that for the 2015 World
I
Cup
expect that tweeted.
in Australia and New Zealand, we will have a cricket.
Well, you know, this is, I think, the whole point. The point is that traditionally, instead of thinking about, hey, cricket is only played in the Commonwealth countries,
Yes.
If you recognize the fact that they are people from Australia or England or India or Pakistan or Sri Lanka in the Bay Area,
Right.
and they will get up at 2 in the morning
Right.
to watch the Cricket World Cup, why not deliver it? And it's a new monetization form for them. So I think what technology is allowing people to do is to say, we will bring the game to the individual as opposed to the other way around.
I'm waiting for ESPN to buy Wisden, you know.
We did.
You're kidding. You
No, we bought the Wisden Cricket Almanac. Yeah.
So much for my research in advance on this. Sorry.
I got you.
Yeah, you did.
You didn't
yes,
check
and
your
that one-
data.
yes, I was wrong. It's right over here.
Hi, my question is for Shantanu. Shantanu, my name is Quentin Alsbury from Roby. I started in graphic design about 20 years ago, and I've been an Adobe user for about that as long. And later in my career, I progressed into doing data visualization design for companies that were that needed data products that they could actually engage with and understand. And my question is, Adobe, having built a huge part of its business off of creating a creative class and empowering them with a tool set for what's essentially unstructured content for print brochures, for websites, for animations with Flash, etc. Do you feel like, and do you see that there's an opportunity to empower a similar type of community around designing data products, considering how important that is now going forward, to actually create engaging experiences that people can actually relate to and understand what's going on with the data?
It's a great question, and that's exactly the goals of what we're trying to do with the Creative Cloud. We're trying to reimagine the entire creative process and the life cycle of content. Adobe was traditionally at the front end of content. We created print or web, but then we weren't engaged in helping visualize it or helping monetize it or helping deliver it across multiple medium. And I think that's really the holy grail for what we're trying to do. Tablets are going to be creation devices. They're not just going to be consumption devices. We need to step up. We've done some hardware associated with it. And so it's exciting. Just like socials changed everything, mobiles changed everything, cloud, it is going to change our business. And I think the employees have responded magnificently to this sort of new canvas. It's a much larger canvas.
Do you think Adobe is more of a, from the ESPN perspective, which of course has a tremendous video and artistic and aesthetic sensibility, is Adobe more valuable to you disaggregated or aggregated and integrated as both a creative and an analytics provider?
It is more valuable, integrated. We feel our way through the different steps. What's been impressive to me is we started off thinking about Adobe as basically an analytics company,
right.
Or everybody in the magazine was familiar using Adobe for design. Their solutions around video, however, have really been an eye-opener for me over the last year or so. So it just shows you how the business evolves. And I would venture say you made that decision based upon data.
That's exactly right.
Gentleman over here.
Thanks. Hi, Kurt Wagner with Fortune. This is a question for John regarding the Nate Silver hire. obviously he's very popular and has a great following, but I think the readership for ESPN and the New York Times is probably slightly different. I'm curious, what he does to kind of bring big data into a more culturally accepted part of the country. You know, what does he do for it from a pop culture standpoint?
Well, I mean, you know, keep in mind, we bought 538, the blog that he does, and he's going to continue doing what he does.
Right.
You know, in the same way that you founded the New York Times, and ABC News is going to be his partner for all of his political coverage, which will be ample. He comes into a friendly environment at our place, but you're just going to see more of what he's doing, and similar to what Bill Simmons has done with Grantland, Nate wants to hire a little merry band and sort of create their own content engine. So it would be very interesting to see what happens.
So it's the Bill Simmons model, basically.
It's the Bill Simmons model. So
Right.
people would think, well, Nate's leaving politics to go to sports. It's the opposite.
Right.
He's just going to do more of what you're familiar with.
He's your
Yeah,
part of your
and-
portfolio of great brands.
And you know, speaking of which, he'll probably have a bigger presence at the MIT conference that
Right.
you helped start
Thank
with
you.
Daryl Morey
Well,
from the
Daryl started it, but I was
Houston Rockets. So,
happy to.
yeah, so.
But I want to ask a question because you know we're talking about ESPN, but the reality is ESPN is part of a humongous media company, Disney, and I think are you the canary in the mine? Is ESPN the canary in the mine for a lot of what Disney needs to do and should do in the cloud, in digital media, et cetera? Or are you a kind of dotted line? Are you a major influencer and laboratory for the future of the digital Disney? And obviously, Shantanu hopes that you would bring Adobe in that. Where does ESPN organizationally and culturally stand in terms of influencing Disney, ABC, and this giant media behemoth?
Well, ESPN has always been a leader since April 1st, 1995, when the website launched. Right. However, it's important, there's tremendous amount of innovation within Disney, and you know, Bob Iger sits on the board at Apple.
Right.
Bob is our biggest user, you know, and our biggest fan. So I'd say the influence really starts from the top between Bob and John Skipper, who's my boss, who's the president. So, you know, good ideas get shared. Again, the beauty of the deal with Nate was you had Ben Sherwood, who stepped up and wanted to do something big with ABC News. Right. There'll be something big that will happen around the Academy Awards, and that involves ABC. So there's a lot of stuff going on throughout the company.
Is Adobe big in Disney?
We are. I mean, can you think of content creation? Can you think of a video without Adobe playing some role in that?
But Apple could.
You know, it doesn't matter what form of content you're thinking about, whether it's web, whether it's print, whether it's video. It's Adobe tools at the front end of that. Disney uses us also for our analytics, all of their live events when they're putting on music. And so I don't think there's a company on the planet that doesn't use some form of Adobe software.
Okay. Question over here?
Hello?
Yeah.
Glenn Kacher from Light Street Capital. Question for you, for John. It seems like more and more when I turn to news shows, including SportsCenter, but also entertainment-based shows as well about that industry, it's more and more of the content is about what happened on Twitter that day and who said what on Twitter. As a media company that I think wants to be the center of where, or own the conversation, let's say, is that a long-term issue for Disney, and how do you get back that mantle?
Well, I think you have to participate in the world that is. So we want our destinations to be fantastic, but we want to reach our fans where they are. So Twitter is you know, potentially a scary competitor, but they're an awesome partner too. And again, you see changes in how things have gone. When we run a documentary and LeBron James is tweeting about it real time, it affects the audience, it affects the perception of that program. And we also take a look at just the impact of an individual. When he tweets, you know, how is that favorited? How is that retweeted? What does that mean? So there's a lot of value that comes back to ESPN, from it. I think so long as we do a good job, we will always be in the center of that conversation. And to where we started this discussion, the introduction of analytics, real-time information into storytelling is one of the ways I believe we stay there.
So that was really the key strategic change, the recognition that it wasn't enough to enable greater creativity. You had to embed the ability to do real-time monitoring and analytics based on that real-time monitoring to better monetize or better understand the impact of that content creation?
It was, and it was a bet we made 4 years ago, and I think it's paid off in spades. The way I'd also answer the other question was, you're actually making your story more compelling by including the conversation that's happening on different channels.
Right.
So if that improves the storytelling,
well, let me ask,
good.
You've been around for a decade, you've lived through these, what are the new metrics that are emerging? What are the new ways different ways of measuring engagement? What is the number or measure of effectiveness that you look at in 2013 that if I had told you you'd be looking at it in 2010, you'd have kicked me out of your office?
I would say level of engagement on Twitter. And that's not just...
Your question.
Yeah,
right there.
but that's not just the amount of followers someone has or how often they post. It's how people react to that and what that means. So for instance, Darren Ravel, who's our sports business reporter, probably has about 350,000 followers on Twitter. There are many at ESPN who have far more than he does. But the level of engagement that he has with his audience is really astounding.
So the retweets are disproportionately higher.
Correct. And so that sends a message about how people are reacting. And that informs content decisions. That informs the kind of talent that we sign.
So when a Vine comes out, when a different genre or flavor of social media comes out, to what extent is that a real opportunity for Adobe that you can integrate versus, oh my gosh, this adds to the layers of complexity and confuses the way we provide value?
I think complexity is our friend, because if somebody steps up and says, through a single interface, you can deal with the different social media or different search mechanisms or different ways, then somebody's stepping up to solving a real problem for somebody who just wants to get their content out. I think there's another area of real research that companies have to do, which is attribution, right?
Okay.
And we haven't really started to talk about how do you attribute value. You talked about just numbers versus, where's the conversation happening in an engaging way. And so I think attribution, again, is another area where...
So you have this fantastic visibility into the way the clients, your customers, use Creative Cloud and Marketing Cloud. What have you seen them do that's interesting in terms of analytics that makes you say, we need to get ahead of that?
Well, I think a lot of people are really pushing us in this whole space of cross-channel. So when somebody comes and does merchandising, they may have done search as the last thing that they did to come to your website, but the decision may have been made further upstream when they actually had a social conversation with somebody. And so you'd rather spend more money where the social conversation is happening as well. And so I think connecting the dots in that sense is an area where I think there's more area of research.
You're absolutely entitled to quote yourself on these things. We have time for one last question or comment? Then we're going to get out of Dodge. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for your openness and bluntness and usefulness in terms of the quality of your answers. And I want to thank the audience for its time and attention and questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And I think we're turning over to Adam now. Take care.